Hey, what's up? Sergey Ivanov here, and welcome to episode 1 of a new series that I like to call Snapshot. Alright, what is Snapshot? This is basically a YouTube series that I'm starting where I show you the process all the way from conceptualization to the final editing and printing of my photography work. Along the way, as I'm showing you the process, I'll tell stories about what brought me to shoot the subject, stories that happened while I was on location, even filming the videos. I've been a photographer, specifically a film photographer, for almost, 4 or 5 years now, so I've been at it for a decent amount of time. I'm by no means an expert. I mean, if you are looking for definitive ideas about what photography is and should be, don't go to these videos. What these videos are about is me telling stories and showing you, alright, what was going through my head? What was I thinking when I took this photograph, and why did I make the choices that I made? How can we learn from that? How can I learn from that? Because I can learn a thing or two, obviously. So for the very first episode of the series Snapshot, I'd like to tell you a little quick story about the strip club. A lot of the times when I take photographs, it really just begins with I'm driving down the road or I'm going to one place, and while I'm going to that place, I see something on the side of the road, or I maybe get lost and I see this one location, this one subject, and I think, alright, maybe this would be very good for photographing. That's how pretty much most of my photography subjects come into fruition. And this example was no different. I was actually going to an antique store down in Mayfield, a couple miles away from my house. So I was driving, and on the right, off of the highway, I see there's a little alcove, a little road going back into the woods, and I see that there's an old abandoned building, and it's purple, and it draws a lot of attention. I go, oh, okay, that would be very interesting to photograph for a photo session later on. So a couple days later, I actually go out with some buddies to Wingstop, and after I go to Wingstop, I decide, alright, this is gonna be the day I go out and photograph that abandoned building. So to give you guys a little bit of context, pretty much every photo that I shoot is taken on the Pentax K1000 with either a 28mm or a 50mm lens, and I almost exclusively shoot Vision 3 500T, which is a motion picture film. I either shoot Vision 3 500T or something else in the Vision 3 lineup. I leave Wingstop, we have a good time, and then I go to the location of this building. I pull into the parking lot, I get my tripod out, everything is set up, and I start taking photographs and making compositions. Now, at a certain point, I start to get close to this purple building, and I get close enough to read what exactly the sign says. And the sign reads, Electric Monkeys Gentlemen's Club. So the minute that I read that sign, I think to myself, alright, this photo session just got 10 times better just by what I'm photographing, and I didn't even realize it before. So I take my fair share of photographs of this abandoned strip club, Electric Monkeys, and then right in the corner of my eye I see, alright, hey, what's that over there? And I look, and I think to myself, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? And what I'm seeing is a whole bunch of old vintage cars. And if you think that shooting abandoned buildings is a staple of 2020 film photography, just wait until you see all the vintage rusty cars that you see when you look up hashtag film photography. It will blow your mind. There are more images on film of old, rusty, derelict cars than the amount of girlfriends I've had. That's how many vintage car photos are on Instagram under film photography. So I see the potential for these subjects in a composition, and I go, alright, this is a good chance to take photographs of these cars. So I slowly approach, and at a certain point I start to smell something just awful. And I've seen enough Law and Order to know that when you approach an old car and something starts to smell bad, you're about to become a witness in a trial. So I slowly approach the car, and I look as closely as I can through all of them, There's no bodies or anything, there's no dead animals. So I think to myself, all right, what is making this awful smell? And I look down at the ground, and there's this brown, there are like these brown patches, and I thought they were like mud or like growths of like weeds or anything. And the more I look at it, the more I realize someone has been living in the cars, because you could see through the windows there were pillows and blankets and soft drinks and you know, food. I mean, they obviously haven't lived there in a long time, because I mean, anyone who's living in these cars, I mean, you'd be better off just living in the forest. Someone had been living in the cars, and what I was seeing and smelling on the pavement next to them was yeah, that's what it was. So even though I'm put off, I continue and I take the photographs anyway. And there was some actually pretty good composition. It was actually interesting to see a lot of the variety, because there was this one truck that looked like it was from the 70s. One car looked like it was from the early 60s, and that was really interesting. One looked like it was from the 80s. And as we all know, cars from the 80s were just really bad and they didn't look good, and they didn't function well either. So at that point, I had been there for quite long enough, and I decided to pack up my things and head home, and that was the end of the photography session. Now there are 10 trillion thousand YouTube videos online about how to develop color film, how to develop black and white film, how to develop film in coffee, in orange juice or whatever. So I have no reason to give you a video on how to develop color film. So I process the film, I hang up the negatives, cut, sleeve them, and I realize there is a little bit of a problem. I go to the shots of this club, and I realize they're a teensy bit overexposed, and that was just what I was seeing at the time, just looking at the contact sheet. And I know that like everyone out there is like, oh, overexposed film by 5 or 6 stops, it gives a dreamy look. I'm not really about that. I like to expose at box speed, because I mean that's what the film was made for. So the fact that these shots were overexposed kind of confused me, and I think I understand what happened. The roll before I started shooting the 500T, I was actually shooting some 250D, which is a different film stock, which is 1 stop less ISO. So I think what happened was my meter was set for 250D instead of ISO 500, so that automatically made everything 1 stop brighter than it should have been. And also coupled with the bright, hot, direct sunlight, it just overexposed things a little more than I would have liked for them to be overexposed. Now, even though they are overexposed shots, I think to myself, alright, it's gonna be enough information for me to recover that in the scan. And it was enough information for me to recover in the scan, but oh boy, if there is anything that will put you off from overexposing color film, and maybe this is just Portra works very well with overexposure, or whatever works very well with overexposure. I have shot almost 50 plus rolls of Vision 3 500T. I cannot safely recommend overexposing that film by any more than maybe 2 stops at the most, and that's pushing it. From my experience, I cannot, of sound mind, recommend that you overexpose this film. Ideally, just meter correctly and get the correct exposure, and if you need to do any brightening, there's plenty of detail. It's plenty clean enough. There's not a high amount of grain where that's going to be a problem if you brighten it later on. So just shoot at box speed if you're shooting this film. That's my advice to you. So one of the parts of this new series Snapshot is I'm going to show you my maybe top 4 or 5, top couple of selections from the photo shoot, and tell you what I like about them and what I don't like about them. Things that are good and things that the next time I go out into the field I need to maybe keep in mind for the next photo session. So this is actually the very first photo that I took in this session. And it's pretty interesting because we sort of have the trifecta of film photography here. On one end, we've got an abandoned old building. On the other opposite end, we've got an old, rundown, abandoned sign. And sandwiched in between the two, we have old vintage cars. You can probably see it maybe a little bit, maybe not, in my work that I actually I'm a big sucker for two things. One, cinematic aspect ratios, which is strange because everyone talks about having cinematic film photos, and I don't even really necessarily go for that when I'm shooting, but I definitely like cinematic aspect ratios. So I like that, and also I like groups of 3 in photographs, especially when they sort of form a triangular sort of composition. Those are things I love. Things I like about this photograph. I like the fact there's some interesting color contrast, especially with the red on that, I don't know what it is, connector to a semi. Whatever that is, there's a big bright red splash right there, and I think that works really well, and it sort of draws your eye right into the center and then leads, because of the horizontality, that's not a word, the fact that that semi-truck is horizontal. It sort of leads you points in one way and then the other. So I really like that about the photo. I like the fact that the purple just stands out so vividly from the green, the natural green tone, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's this purple color right in the middle of nowhere. Now, what's something that I don't like about this composition? I'll tell you one thing that I don't like about this composition right off the bat, is that if you zoom in real carefully, I shot this with the tripod, but I guess that I didn't stabilize it well enough because there's a teensy bit of camera shake. It's so small, if you don't zoom in, you're not even gonna see it. But it is there, and it's a little bit distracting once you know it's there. The other thing that I would do over again if I got the chance is I would make the composition a little less tight. With the subjects so cramped into one sort of line from left to right, I don't think I gave specifically the sign and the club enough breathing room on both sides, on the left and right sides. And I think that if I maybe took a few steps back, I would have given those subjects a little bit more breathing room, and it would have been a bit more easy on the eyes, and it would have been a much more relaxed composition rather than being so tightly right there. Okay, now this composition, it probably is my favorite of all of the photos that I took that day. If you just go on my Instagram, you will see in about 5 seconds that I am a sucker for vertical compositions. Probably a good 80% of the photos I take are vertical compositions, and I've been trying to branch out a little bit from that lately, but a good portion of them are vertical compositions. I'm just a sucker for them. So to give a little bit of context, what you're seeing is one of the trucks that a homeless person lived in, and also whatever cans of soup they ate for lunch, they just threw out into the trash right behind the truck. And the minute I saw it, I knew I had to make it a composition. Now, what is something that I like about the photo? One thing I really like about the photo, and this is something that Vision 3 specifically does really well, is if you look at the truck, the 2 taillights are just such bright, poppy instances of red, and I did nothing to these. They're just that bright. I mean, when you view reds on Vision 3 films, I mean, it's like you have to wear sunglasses. That's how bright and vivid they are. And that, I think, is really very interesting because it's just these 2 pinpoint instances of bright, vivid color amongst a sea of pretty gross, mucky, just sort of it's literal garbage. I mean, that's what it is. Now, what's something I would do differently if I took the photo again? I would probably position my camera in a way that was a little to the left, so it was more directly truck right below it. There's the trash, and it's not sort of diagonal. I kind of don't like that. But the big thing is, I think that propane tank right in the left of the image, I think that is a little bit distracting, But I think overall, it doesn't draw your eye away too much, so I think I'm pretty safe in that regard. I'm a little bit torn on this photo. In some ways, I really like it. In some ways, I don't like it at all. I said that there was an 80s car that looked really bad. This was the 80s car. While I was photographing, all the other ones were sealed up shut, no broken windows. This was the only car with broken in windows. So I thought, all right, I'll walk up to it and do some, detail shots of the interiors and see what I can get out of that. And I think there's some reasons why this composition works and reasons why it doesn't work. One thing that I definitely like about this composition is if you look it's not exactly center, but a little off center, there's that one pinpoint instance of orange amongst this sort of sea of pale greens and grays, really drabby colors, and I think that's a nice little touch amongst all the sea of just sort of blay colors. Also, another thing I really like about this composition is the glass sort of sub-frames the interior of the car. You've got the bright glass on the outside. Now, what is something I don't like about the photo? I know it sort of contradicts with what I just said about the sub-framing, but I don't like the glass. I would have gotten less glass. It's sub-framed enough to where, yes, it's sub-framing, but also it shows a bit too much glass to where, alright, you start looking at the glass and then you start looking at the little window pane on the door, and it just sort of draws your eye to places that I don't want it to be drawn to. So this is the last photo that I took at that location. I think it was pretty interesting. This one is probably the most simple of all of the compositions so far. It's literally two subjects, the club itself and the sign, far away, wide angle, those are the only really true elements within the photo. It's a very simple photo. It's very easy to take in. It's not too much information. It gets the point of this purple out of place building amongst a sea of green and grays. It gets that point across and it does it well. What is something I don't like about the photo? If you zoom in real close, you can see in the background I got a passing truck in the frame, and that's not something I wanted. I wanted this to be a sort of very calm, still photograph where the building and the siren are the only two things that draw your eye. And there in the background is this bright red semi-truck. And like I said, Vision 3 films really accentuate the reds. It's such a good shot that got ruined by just a passing truck that I didn't even know it was there at the time. I didn't even see it while it was passing. So let that be a lesson learned. If you want a simple composition that is free of big giant red semi-trucks passing through your frame, look to see if there are big giant red semi-trucks passing through your frame before you take the exposure. Now here's a little bonus story. Well, I don't film the videos for this series while I'm actually taking the photos. I actually take the photos first, and if the photos are anything worth sharing, then I'll make a video about it. When the videos that you're seeing are actually sort of a recreation of what it would have been like to see me take the photos and what I was thinking and what I did and my setup. So those aren't actually what was going on that day. Those are just recreations of me taking those photos. And while I was out filming the recreations for this video, I actually found a little bit further, almost like maybe 100 feet further behind a clearing of trees, there was actually an old abandoned drive-through liquor store, which I didn't even know those were legal. That doesn't seem like it would be a legal thing to do, which is actually probably why it's abandoned, because they probably just went out of business when they passed a law that said don't drink and drive. So I got a couple photos of that abandoned drive-through, and that was really poppy. It had these bright yellows and really vivid colors, just again in the middle of these bright, hot, sunny, muted greens and muted sky blues and just warm, hot Kentucky sun. Big, out of place, colorful, vivid structures. And that's something I'm really interested in, is things that are clearly out of place in the context of where they are or what they are. So anyway, that does it for this first inaugural episode of the series Snapshot. Did you like it? Did you like this format of video where I just sit down in front of the camera and tell you my process for making photographs and the conceptualization, what I was thinking when I took them? Do you like that format? Are there ways I can improve? I'm always willing to listen to criticism, especially on the first episode of a new series. Tell me what you think, tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. Make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to follow me on Instagram at Servanov and also at Sergey_speaks. Make sure to also listen to the Sound of Sergey podcast on Spotify every Friday at 10 a.m. Make sure to watch out for Sergey Speaks, which comes out on this same YouTube channel at 12 p.m. That's noon Central Standard Time. So make sure to look out for that. That happens every other week. It'll be Sergey Speaks and then Snapshot. So that'll be the schedule every other week. Thank you so much for watching episode 1 of Snapshot, and I will see you next week.